The air inside the Araneta Coliseum in Quezon City was not just hot, it was alive. It was November 1971. The concrete walls of the massive arena seemed to pulse with the collective heartbeat of 9,000 spectators. This was the Thrilla in Manila, before the world knew that name, a different kind of Thrilla, a clash of ideologies, a collision of East and West, of tradition and innovation. The humidity was a physical weight, pressing down on the shoulders of the crowd, mixing with the smell of popcorn, cheap beer, and the distinct, metallic scent of anticipation. This was the World Martial Arts Exhibition, a showcase of champions. But tonight was different. The organizers had managed a coup. They had secured a special demonstration match between the Soviet Union's Sambo champion and the rising star of Hong Kong, Bruce Lee. The political tension was palpable. The Cold War was freezing the globe, and here, in the heart of the Philippines, two warriors from opposite sides of the Iron Curtain were about to meet in a ring made of canvas and rope. In the center of the ring stood a monument to human engineering. His name was Konstantin, the Siberian Bear, Petrov. He was 6 feet 6 inches of pure, unadulterated mass. Weighing in at 265 pounds, he looked less like a man and more like a tank carved out of granite. His chest was a barrel, his arms thick as tree trunks, and his neck was a pillar of muscle that seemed to merge directly with his jaw. He wore a red robe with the hammer and sickle embroidered on the back, his face a mask of stoic, cold arrogance. He was the Soviet champion, a man who had dominated the heavyweights of Sambo and Judo with a terrifying efficiency that left opponents broken, both physically and spiritually. He represented the Soviet ideal, strength through structure, power through the collective, the individual subordinate to the state. Across the ring, standing in the neutral corner, was a man who seemed to belong to a different species entirely. Bruce Lee. He was 5 feet 7 inches tall and weighed a mere 135 pounds. He wore simple black kung fu pants and a white, sleeveless top that hung loosely on his lean frame. He did not look like a tank. He looked like a coiled spring, a predator made of wire and whipcord. His body was shredded, muscles distinct and functional, designed for speed and precision rather than blunt force. He moved with a fluidity that seemed impossible, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his eyes scanning the ring with the detached focus of a surgeon. He represented the opposite of Petrov, the individual, the formless, the art of the human spirit unburdened by rigid systems. The crowd was a sea of noise. Banners waved, vendors shouted. The atmosphere was electric, a tinderbox waiting for a spark. The referee, a small, nervous man named Mr. Sato, called both fighters to the center of the ring. The rules were simple, full contact, but points awarded for technique. The goal was a demonstration of dominance, not a street fight. No eye gouging, no biting. But everyone knew that with men like these, rules were often just suggestions. Shake hands, Sato instructed, his voice trembling slightly in the presence of such physical disparity. Petrov stepped forward, his massive frame blocking out the lights. He looked down at Bruce, his face a mixture of pity and disdain. He did not extend his hand immediately. Instead, he stood towering over the smaller man, a psychological tactic designed to intimidate, to remind Bruce of his size disadvantage. The crowd booed. They sensed the disrespect. Petrov eventually thrust his hand forward, a meaty paw that swallowed Bruce's hand in a grip that was meant to crush. Bruce did not flinch. He returned the grip with an iron tension of his own, his eyes never leaving Petrov's cold blue stare. Then came the moment that would define the night. In this ring, we observe the traditions of respect, Sato said. Please bow to each other. It was a standard martial arts courtesy. A sign of mutual respect, acknowledging that the fight was a test of skill, not a war of hatred. Petrov stepped back. He looked at the referee, then at the crowd, and finally down at Bruce Lee. A sneer curled his lip. He crossed his massive arms over his chest. I do not bow to capitalists, Petrov said, his voice a deep, rumbling bass that echoed through the silent arena. I do not bow to actors. I bow only to the state. The crowd erupted in a mixture of shock and anger. It was a slap in the face, not just to Bruce Lee, but to the entire martial arts community present. It was an act of supreme arrogance, a declaration that his opponent was beneath him, unworthy of the basic dignity of the sport. Bruce Lee stood still. He did not get angry. He did not protest. He simply looked at Petrov, his face impassive. He nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible movement. It was the nod of a man who had just been given permission to end the pretense. He stepped back, not into a traditional kung fu stance, but into a loose, fluid posture. He bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, his lead hand extended, his rear hand guarding his chin. He looked relaxed, but his eyes were now sharp, piercing lasers. The referee, unsure how to handle the breach of protocol, simply looked at the timekeeper. The bell rang. Ding, the sound was a trigger. The noise of the crowd died down to a low hum as 9,000 people leaned forward in their seats. Petrov did not dance. He did not bounce. He advanced. He moved like a glacier, slow, inevitable, crushing everything in his path. He raised his massive hands, which were wrapped in leather gloves, and closed the distance. He expected Bruce to run, to use his speed to stay away from the danger zone. That was the smart move for a small man. But Bruce Lee did not retreat. He stood his ground. Petrov lunged. A massive, clubbing right hand, a Russian hook designed to take a head off. It was fast for a man his size. The crowd gasped. But the punch hit only air. Bruce wasn't there. He had slipped to the side, moving just 6 inches, enough to let the fist graze his ear. Petrov spun, his massive legs churning the canvas. He threw a left. Again, empty space. Bruce was a ghost. He was moving not away, but around. He circled the giant, staying just outside the range of those tree-trunk arms. 20 seconds in. Petrov was getting frustrated. He had swung 3 times and hit nothing. He growled, a sound of animal frustration. He dropped his level, shooting for a takedown, a classic Sambo move. He wanted to grab Bruce, drag him to the mat, and crush him with ground and pound. He lunged forward with the speed of a linebacker. Bruce saw the shift in weight. He didn't try to stop the mass, that would have been suicide. Instead, he used Petrov's momentum. He delivered a side kick, not a push, but a snapping strike, to Petrov's lead knee. The sound was sharp, like a whip crack. It wasn't a knockout blow, but it destabilized the giant's foundation. Petrov stumbled, his grab missing by a mile. He crashed into the ropes, shaking the entire ring structure. The crowd roared. Bruce Lee was toying with him. Petrov turned, his face red with exertion and rage. He was being humiliated. The little man was making him look foolish. He charged again, this time throwing a flurry of punches, a left, a right, an uppercut. He was trying to corner Bruce, to cut off the ring. Bruce moved like water. He flowed left, then right, ducking under the uppercut as if it were in slow motion. He stepped in close, danger close. He was inside Petrov's guard now, a place where most fighters would die. But Bruce was comfortable in the chaos. 40 seconds. Bruce fired a rapid-fire combination. Pop pop pop. 3 straight blasts to Petrov's midsection. They weren't power punches designed to knock him out, they were speed shots, designed to steal breath and shock the nerves. Petrov grunted, his abs taking the blow, but the impact made him flinch. Bruce spun, his heel flashing up in a hook kick that caught Petrov on the side of the head. It was a stunning blow. The giant stumbled again. The crowd was on its feet now. The silence of the beginning had turned into a deafening roar. Petrov was wild now. He abandoned technique. He was swinging haymakers, desperate to connect, desperate to wipe the smirk off the little man's face. He roared, throwing a looping right hand with everything he had. Bruce watched it come. He didn't dodge. He parried. His left hand met Petrov's forearm, redirecting the force outward. Simultaneously, his right hand shot forward, the legendary 1-inch punch mechanics engaged. His hips snapped. The power generated from the floor up. The punch landed. It wasn't a face punch. It was a drive into the sternum, the solar plexus. Petrov's eyes bulged. It felt like a sledgehammer had been driven into his chest. His diaphragm seized. He couldn't breathe. The air left his lungs in a violent wheeze. He didn't fall, not yet, but he was paralyzed, his body momentarily shutting down from the shock to the nervous system. 60 seconds. Bruce didn't press the attack. He stepped back, dropping his hands. He watched Petrov gasp for air, a fish out of water on dry land. He was giving him a chance to recover, a chance to understand. Petrov sucked in a ragged breath. He looked at Bruce, and for the first time, the arrogance was gone. Replaced by fear. Real, primal fear. He realized that the man in front of him was not just an actor. He was something else. Something he had never encountered. A master of kinetic energy. Petrov screamed, a cry of desperation. He lowered his head and charged, a bull seeing red. He wanted to tackle Bruce, to use his weight to end it. It was his last gamble. Bruce stood still. He waited until the last possible second. He could see the sweat on Petrov's forehead. He could see the vein pulsing in his temple. At the moment of impact, Bruce moved. He didn't go left or right. He went up. He leaped, executing a flying knee, a technique rarely seen in that era outside of Muay Thai. His knee collided with Petrov's chin as the giant rushed in. The crack was audible throughout the entire arena. Petrov's head snapped back. His legs turned to jelly. The momentum of his charge carried him forward, but his brain had already shut down. He collapsed. He didn't crumble slowly. He fell like a statue being pulled down by a rope. He hit the canvas with a thud that shook the floorboards. Silence. Absolute, deafening silence. It had been 90 seconds. 9,000 people stared into the ring. The giant, the Soviet bear, the undefeatable champion, lay motionless on the canvas. Standing over him, barely breaking a sweat, his chest rising and falling in a calm rhythm, was Bruce Lee. Bruce looked down at the fallen giant. He did not raise his hands in victory. He did not do a victory lap. He checked to see if Petrov was breathing, ensuring he hadn't killed him. Seeing the giant's chest rise, Bruce turned and walked to his corner. The referee stood frozen. He looked at the timekeeper. The clock showed 1:30. He looked at Petrov's corner, who were rushing into the ring with smelling salts and water. Then he looked at Bruce. Bruce turned to the center of the ring. He looked at Petrov, who was just beginning to stir, groggy and confused. Bruce bowed. It was a deep, formal bow. He bowed to the man who had refused to bow to him. It was the ultimate act of dominance, not through force, but through grace. It was the ultimate lesson. True strength does not need to be arrogant. It does not need to disrespect. It simply is. Petrov sat up, helped by his coaches. He saw Bruce bowing. He saw the respect being offered to him despite his earlier insult. He saw the crowd, silent and watching. He realized then that he had been beaten not just physically, but spiritually. He had been beaten by a better man. Slowly, shakily, Petrov stood up. He swayed on his feet, his eyes clearing. He looked at Bruce, who had risen from the bow and was watching him with calm, neutral eyes. Petrov took a step forward. The crowd tensed, thinking he might attack again. But he didn't. He planted his feet. And then, the Siberian bear, the pride of the Soviet machine, bowed. He bowed low, lower than Bruce had. He held the bow for 3 seconds. When he rose, the arena exploded. It was a sound like thunder, a release of the tension that had built up over those 90 seconds. It wasn't just applause, it was a roar of appreciation for a moment that transcended politics, transcended size, transcended style. Bruce Lee walked over to Petrov and extended his hand. Petrov took it. They shook, not as enemies, but as warriors who had shared the fire. "You are fast," Petrov said, his voice raspy and broken. "Like lightning." "Style is not everything," Bruce replied quietly. "The mind is the weapon." Bruce turned and exited the ring. He didn't wait for the announcement of the winner. Everyone knew who had won. He walked down the aisle, through the parting crowd, and disappeared into the shadows of the Coliseum tunnels. The news of the fight spread like wildfire. It was reported in the papers the next day, though the details were often exaggerated. The official report called it an exhibition. But the 9,000 people who were there knew the truth. They had seen a masterclass. They had seen arrogance humbled by humility. They had seen a giant fall because he refused to bend, and a small man rise because he refused to break. In the dressing room, Bruce sat on a wooden bench. He unwrapped his hands. There was no excitement in his eyes, only a quiet satisfaction. Linda, his wife, came in and hugged him. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yes," he said. He was strong. But strength without flexibility is brittle. It breaks. The lesson of that night in Manila was not about the knockout. It was about the bow. It was about the choice Bruce made to offer respect even when none was given. It was a lesson that echoed through the martial arts world for decades to come. Konstantin Petrov retired from competition 2 years later. He never spoke publicly about the fight, but those who knew him said he was a changed man. He began to incorporate fluidity into his training, moving away from the rigid structures of pure sambo. He learned that while he was a bear, the world was full of dragons. And Bruce Lee. He continued his journey, creating films that would inspire millions, writing philosophies that would change the way the world viewed combat. But whenever he was asked about his greatest fight, he would often smile and think of the night in Manila. The night the Siberian bear refused to bow, and 90 seconds later, learned why he should have. For in the end, the true martial artist does not fight to destroy. He fights to build. To build character, to build understanding, to build bridges between people who would otherwise remain strangers. And sometimes, that bridge is built with a single bow, a single punch, and 90 seconds of absolute silence. 90 seconds. That was all it took. A minute and a half to dismantle a lifetime of arrogance. A minute and a half to teach a lesson that words could never convey. A minute and a half to show 9,000 people that the size of the fighter does not matter, only the size of the fight in the fighter. The ring was empty now. The lights were dimming. The echo of the crowd's roar had faded into the night. But the memory remained, etched into the canvas, etched into the minds of those who witnessed it. A memory of the dragon and the bear. A memory of silence. A memory of respect earned the hard way. That is the story they still tell in the gyms of Manila. The night Bruce Lee proved that a bow is not a sign of weakness, but a sign of the highest strength. The strength to be human in the face of inhumanity. The strength to remain calm in the face of rage. The strength to stand up, even when the whole world expects you to bow down. Or in Konstantin Petrov's case, the strength to finally bow, after 90 seconds of absolute truth. And that truth? Simple. Be water, my friend. Even when facing a mountain of stone. Be water. Flow, crash, adapt, and survive. That is the way. That is the only way.